And then the recession hit. My business fell off a cliff and I thought I was done. So I gave my presses to my assistant who had opened up her own press. Thank God I did that because 3 months later I was printing again.
This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and you have reached us at Series 3 of Platemark, in which I interview the fabulous and wonderful people who occupy the print ecosystem. I'm an independent curator myself, specializing in prints and printmaking. So most of these people are people that I know and have worked with over the years, but they are wonderful people, and I hope you will enjoy the interviews. Today's guest is Maryanne Ellison Simmons, who is the printer and owner of Wildwood Press in St. Louis, Missouri. She also collected works on paper, mostly prints, along with her husband, Ted Simmons, who happens to be a major league catcher of some renown. He's in the Hall of Fame as we speak, was inducted a few years ago. They collected works in depth by not a handful of artists, but super in depth with people like Kiki Smith and Enrique Chagoya and Tom Huck. So the exhibition that was up at the St. Louis Art Museum was fabulous, and I wanted to circle back and talk to Maryanne about it. All right, so let's see, housekeeping. My positionality, I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Any images that Maryanne and I talk about will be available to you over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also, on the website, leave a message from me, a voicemail, ask me a question. I dare you. And you can also hit the support and donate button and help us keep the lights on here at Platemark. It's just me. All right, I think that's it. Buckle up and let's go. Maryanne, it's so great to see you. Thanks for coming on Platemark.
Thank you.
Of course.
Again.
Can you introduce yourself for people? Tell us your name and where you are and what you do.
I'm Maryanne Ellison Simmons. I'm currently at Wildwood Press. I'm a printer publisher. We're in our 26th year, I think. 10 years in this studio, post-recession, just working away.
That's a good thing. So I'm going to confess to listeners that we've recorded with you before when Tru and I were visiting St. Louis, and Ted joined us that day, and I'm killing myself because I didn't have the audio going correctly. Just trashed that whole interview. So we're circling back, and I apologize. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's
It
all right.
happens. But I figured it'd be a great opportunity to talk about not only the exhibition that was at the St. Louis Art Museum that was celebrating your collection that is now at the St. Louis Art Museum, but also to talk to you about Wildwood Press and all of that, expanding.
Yeah.
I always have to ask people, when did you know that prints were a thing? Like, I don't think I figured it out until, after college.
1,000 years ago, I was a printmaking major at University of Michigan, end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. And I was in art school at Michigan, and I had to choose a major, and I double majored in painting and printmaking. And it's always been a thing. So, yeah, it works on paper always.
But did you, in college, did someone say, hey, you should try printmaking? Or did you know already what it was?
No, I knew what it was, and all my buddies were printmakers. And, this is the era of posters. It was everywhere, whether it was protest posters or rock posters, but it was everywhere in the late 60s. So it seemed to make sense.
Do you still paint?
No. It's hiding in there somewhere. There's no telling what will happen tomorrow. But yeah.
No. But as a publisher and printer, some of the people I've talked to who are printers make their own work, but do you make your own prints too?
Once in a while. I tell people when I get really angry and I got something significant to say, maybe I do that. Given the last 6 years, it's stunning I have not done that. But
I know, I'm amazed.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I just swear a lot more now.
Yeah, apologies to listeners ahead of time.
Yes. I'm not swearing here.
No.
The noise in the background you hear is me swearing every day. Yes.
I'm not worried. So did you grow up, you're in St. Louis now. Did you grow up in St. Louis?
No, I grew up outside of Detroit in Southfield, Michigan, and thereabouts, contiguous suburbs of Detroit.
And so after college, you did your graduate work at WashU, right?
20 years later. Ted and I were married when we were 20. I hadn't finished undergrad yet. In those days, we were right on the cusp of people get married early or they don't. And we did because we'd been dating since we were 16. And he had embarked on his baseball career. So for the next 20 years, he hit the road and I raised two kids, adorable children, two boys that I love very much. They now live far away. It's okay.
Very far.
When my youngest son was 15, I went back to grad school here at WashU.
Ted was just on the road all the time and you just held down the fort.
Yeah, from mid-February when spring training starts to October 1st. They're on the road. They play 162 games. Half of them are away. And so it worked out pretty well because I got to do what I wanted to do during those road trips that I miss very much. Tired now, but it seemed like a safe bet. I always intended to go back to school or at least get a refresher course by a litho press. I was a very traditional litho printer, had a very traditional background at a state school. And all of those state schools invested in lithostones. And when you were a printmaking major, you either majored in lithography or etching, and you never crossed paths one studio into the other. That great American Lloyd Menard in South Dakota tells the story. I think he was at Indiana, and he had the same experience. If you were an etcher, you never did lithography. And he would go into the litho studio late at night and work and disappear by morning. And they almost threw him out of school when he posted his thesis show and had litho and etch. Yeah, ridiculous silliness. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, I was a very traditional litho person. I had my own stones, which I hauled over to WashU and, poo-pooed at how horrible the studio was. And it was filthy and chaotic and had these giant presses. And I just was so snooty and I had to roll up my little stones. And then pretty soon I'd start looking around, seeing what everybody else was doing. But the key to my graduate program was one day this visiting artist shows up, Juan Sanchez. And I went, oh my goodness, after being a mother and a nurturer now for 20 years on, it felt a whole lot more comfortable to solve other people's problems than mine. And their problems were more interesting than mine. And off I went. And Juan and I have been printing. We just finished the Martin Luther King print after 30 years of printing together. I'm pretty good.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The idea of solving other people's problems is fascinating because we never give ourselves credit for all of the things we do, and we never think I don't know, maybe you're different, but I'm like, I'm just me, There's nothing special, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here for sure.
Yeah, but that's an interesting way to solve the problem is to turn and help other people realize theirs.
Yeah, and I tell people we have the attention span of a 3-year-old around here. And it's really wonderful to run from Juan Sanchez to Michael Berkmer to Gary Pollard, Michelle Ocadona, and Chaos. And it makes life very interesting for me.
Do you have a titch of ADD? Are you all over the place a lot?
Are you kidding? I'm sure. God, I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of undiagnosed women like us that are flitting around.
Okay, listen, you cannot do what women do without being everywhere all at one time. And isn't that the essence of this? Now that we have a name for this chaos, that's all fine and good. Just don't medicate me,
Fair enough.
Right?
Yeah. So listeners probably know, but I'll remind them that you are not only a printer, but you publish, but you and Ted were rather major collectors and you started with furniture, but
Right.
who started it?
Yeah, I don't know. We've always collected stuff. My grandfather lived in an a little tiny rented cabin in Michigan adjacent to a gravel pit. He had a steam shovel in the gravel pit, and he would just entertain himself and pull interesting rocks out of the gravel pit and give them to my mother. My mother has had this great collection of rocks, which I still have. And so collecting has always been stuff coming to us. When I was growing up in my neighborhood, you'd call the Salvation Army truck to pick up your stuff, right? When the Salvation Army truck came to our house, it was to drop stuff off. Because my mother was always at the Salvation Army looking for fabulous furniture. And yeah, it was great. Anyway, so that's sort of my background. And when Ted and I got married, we started collecting silly little things that we could afford when we were making zero money. When we were first married, he went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there was this incredible little house. And I had always loved contemporary architecture, but I never liked the outside of contemporary houses. And I saw this great little, what turned out to be a 18th century form, a little salt box clapboard, simple little house in the middle of this big, fabulous oil man neighborhood. And when it came time to build a house, we went back to Oklahoma and saw that house. We had never been to New England, and we built this New England house. I was ready to put, my Vasily chairs in that old house. And Ted said, no, I wonder what went in this house. And pretty soon, our architect introduced us to some pickers here in St. Louis who, ravaged New England. And they really taught Ted forms. And so off we went, and we collected 18th century furniture for about 15 years. When he retired, he had managed to educate himself to the point where he wouldn't stand for any repairs, which
Oh,
is
yes,
with the
of course.
200-year-old furniture. But anyway, the market had just skyrocketed. So our economies stopped when he stopped playing. And we were really lucky. He decided, he's the one who usually pulls the trigger on stuff like this. He decided we needed to replace our period furniture with reproduction furniture, because as the market in antiques rose, so did the cabinet making world, right? So there were cabinet makers out there who could reproduce stuff that we could never afford or probably would never appear on the market. So we consigned all that stuff back to a New York dealer just in time, because that's when the antique market bottomed out. So we were lucky. Over the next 15 years, this guy outside of Boston, David Lafort, was making furniture for us. And when the last piece of furniture went into the house, Ted looked at me one cold winter night over a table and said, I think I could get into contemporary art. And I just went, I am so screwed. It is hard enough to make this stuff, let alone collect it. And
Right.
Off we went. Yeah. And it seems like we started yesterday, but it was 20 years before the museum approached us. And I think they determined we had a really quirky collection. We were out there on our own making decisions, not with a crowd. We had some great advice from some people that we had known over the years.
When we were talking in August, I had never met Ted. I've met you before and we're friends. But Ted, I was really impressed with his energy for diving into the research. Like that's hard. My husband wouldn't do that.
No, unlike me, or perhaps you, anybody with ADD, Ted is laser focused. If he's reading, you could dance across the room without clothes on and he wouldn't notice. He's just so just on it. And honest to goodness, I've never known anybody like this. So we were talking about Bruce Nauman the other night, and he said, No, I think that piece was done when he was doing a show in Paris, and there was a mirror at the end of the hall, and I'm going, what are you talking about? And sure enough, I came to the studio, I got the catalog raisonné, and there was this, and he had read the whole book. We have a million books in here. He's read most of them. I've read none of them. I just go to the index and find what I need. He worries that his memory is going. I went, are you kidding me? Yeah, he is on it. And, he grew up with nothing, and money meant a lot to him. And if he was going to buy things, he was going to know about them top to bottom. And it was the same with the furniture. He could go through period houses or period rooms in museums, and the docent could say, that's a Boston chair. And he'd go, I think that's a Rhode Island chair.
Oh, my.
Go over to the little card in the room leaning against the wall, and sure enough, it'd be a Rhode Island chair. He just has that kind of steel trap mind.
And the focus must come from baseball, right?
I'm absolutely certain of it. I mean, he is a very serious student of the game and what he did. And I've only known Ted and his practice and what he does. And I assumed everybody was like that in the game, and they're not. They're so incredibly talented. They can go up there and hit, but they don't think about the dynamics of the game like I know Ted does.
Yeah, one of my kids played baseball all the way through college, and when he was a young, kid playing in the U12, my husband would get him these books on pitching and, the workout, blah, blah, blah. And he had zero interest. And we never go to watch the Orioles play. It fascinates me. He just wants to be in the game. He's not a student of the game.
Yeah. And I have to say, now that Ted is retired, baseball, that has always been the background noise of my life, is rarely on. It's interesting watching him lose the verbiage of all the new names. And
How many years was he able to play professionally?
20,
20?
20 in the major leagues. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he signed out of high school in 1967. So he's been playing since 67 to 88.
88. Okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing, really. So when you guys started collecting the contemporary works on paper, I would imagine it developed organically, and you identified Kiki Smith as somebody you were interested in. But from the get-go, did you expect to collect in depth in, not a handful, but going really in depth in each of the artists you were interested in?
Probably because that's how we always collected, trying to be thorough. The 18th century furniture world is filled with different forms. And, you can do Maryland, you can do Southern furniture, you can do New England, or you can take apart New England and you can do Rhode Island, Boston. And we stayed pretty much in the Rhode Island, Boston world. And then it was full on, like Sherman through the South. It was there, nothing eluded us that was Boston or Rhode Island. No Pennsylvania. You didn't mix it up. So same with our collecting. And we did start with Kiki because our friendship with David Keel at the Whitney. I knew David from being the printer at WashU, and he came to see WashU's press and Tom Huck, because he had heard about Tom Huck, and David's from St. Louis. So he blows in. He started buying things that had been printed prior to me being at WashU. Very important, Annette Lemieux, the two Sanchez's that we had printed. And so it was great. And David and I became friends. But when he met Ted, I think he liked Ted better than me. And he put Ted on his print committee.
I know. I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, I think it served a couple of purposes. One was the print committee was filled with lovely women and one guy. And David wanted to give some support to the one guy who would go back to his office, and he'd get teased about having to go to these meetings at the Whitney with all of these women who lunch. Now he goes back to his office and says, who's on my committee? Which worked out great. So there are all these ulterior motives. And the other thing as Ted is so thorough, when work was presented in the committee, so there are 7 prints in a series, the committee would say, I think we should buy one. And Ted would go, excuse me, this is a series. And my feeling is you buy all of it or none of it. And during that time, those committees purchased a lot of great series because of that. And David would educate his committees, whoever they were, about how you go about this and who the artists were. And the notes from those committee meetings are extraordinary. So those people in that committee, some of whom went on to be on the bigger committees, curatorial committees at the Whitney, learned those lessons in David's committee that, if you have a series of flavins, it's time to buy them to have an in-depth look at this period of time. So we're collecting, but Ted's on the committee, so he's talking to himself as well. So the first thing we bought was a recommendation by David to go see this silver bowl at Pace. And it was right after September 11th, and we were in New York, and it felt so strange and powerful all at the same time. So we really took a leap and bought this silver bowl. And around that time, David told us, find an artist that you love and find those artists' friends. So from Kiki, and we were buying everything we could find in terms of Kiki's works on paper as well, and some small sculpture over the years. I think we ended up with over 50 pieces of Kiki's work. But she led us to Tuttle because Richard Tuttle worked for her father, Hujar, Paul Tack, Ronarovich. And that became the heart of the collection. And as well, David said, collect in your generation, which really blew the doors off the place, because then I could go back, and I've always had a love of Donald Judd and minimalism. And that's where we started. And I think at one of those committee meetings, Shigoya shows up. And Ted comes home and says, there's this guy, Enrique Shigoya, and we really need to look at him. We knew that he was represented by George Adams in New York. Paula Anglum had him in San Francisco. So we called George Adams and rifled through his inventory. Then we called Paula Anglum. And it was interesting because at that time, Paula Anglum's still alive, but she views Enrique as a local artist, right?
Oh.
And here came these kids from St. Louis, and all we wanted to see was Enrique. And suddenly, Enrique becomes a little more important in the eyes of Paula, which was really great. Then we found out he's printing at Bud Shark's in Colorado. And so he does these beautiful codexes, right? They're printed at Bud Shark's. On a Tuesday, we would call and say, do you have this codex? And they would go, yes, we do. And then the afternoon would fly by, and we're looking at the other. And on Wednesday, we'd call Bud and we'd go, do you have these codex? By Thursday, they think we're nuts. So I said, listen, we're stalking this guy's work. I'm going to admit it right here. And I have no idea how much Enrique's work we had that went to the museum. And we're still chasing Enrique.
Are you?
Can't quit him. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway.
I know not everyone is still alive, but is it part of your goal to get to know and become friends with the artists that you collected in depth? I assume you know most of them.
No. If Bruce Nauman called today, I'd get on a plane and run right out there. But no, I met Enrique because he had a sort of retrospective at the Des Moines Art Museum, and we had loaned a couple of pieces. Dan Strong from Grinnell asked Enrique to come and do a lecture. And Ted's on the road, and my mother and I drive up to Grinnell, and we go to the lecture, and he's absolutely wonderful. Then we go to a dinner, and then we meet Enrique, and Ted meets Enrique in San Francisco. And it was great. Ted had lunch with Kiki at her house. at the time of our purchasing the silver bowl, and David thought it was really important that this ball player meet Kiki, which was hilarious. I've been printing Valerie Hammond for a while, and I had Valerie in the studio, and it was 2005 or six, I don't know, 7, 8, whatever. And Valerie's in the studio, my old studio where we had multiple rooms, and I'm in one room, and my phone rings, and it's Ted saying that he's going to have lunch with Kiki. And Valerie's in the other room. Valerie and Kiki are really very good friends. And Kiki is on the phone with Valerie saying, I'm going to have lunch with this ball player. And I'm just going, God, this should not happen. We're printing here. Let's just do that. Okay.
We're working.
Yeah. So every once in a while, our lives cross. And I'm going to say this, but one of the things that I learned in hanging around ball players and ballparks is you pretty much don't want to meet your heroes. It's not fun, and often kind of it can be fabulous and exhilarating, or it can be such a disappointment.
Oh my
I
goodness.
don't want to meet people. You know, if I go to a Springsteen concert and somebody says you want to go backstage, no. No.
Yes, people's outward front-facing personas are often different than
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, we make this stuff up as collectors. You have an idea of what these people must be like. And we're not so naive that we think that, you know, they could be very different than what our made up vision of them is.
except for maybe Huck.
Huck. Yeah, Huck is like our kid. You know, there are moments of great joy and great disappointment. Yeah, I should have started with Huck. You know, printers exchange prints, and I've always done that, my friends. And so I have a lot of prints in the file that have come to me over the last 50 years. But when I met Huck, he left graduate school. He was showing with a young future gallerist here in St. Louis, Phil Sline. And Phil asked me, he said, listen, this guy, Tom Huck's having a show over at this community college. Would you come? And it was out of obligation. I went, oh God, because I don't usually go to openings and stuff like that. So I go, and there are these 14 prints. And it was his first portfolio, 2 weeks in August. And the cutting was amazing. If you think of his cutting now and how it has matured and become so fine, but back in 1995, whenever it was mind-blowing. I'd never seen anything like it. But more importantly, right next to the print was a description of what I'm looking at. And the stories were just off the charts, just crazy stories from rural Missouri. And it was the stories that really engaged me. And so I went home and I told Ted about it. Ted contacted Peter Marcus, who was the head of printmaking at WashU, and said, Maryanne saw this thing, and could you get me a portfolio? And so for Christmas, which we never, ever do, we don't buy each other stuff, we collect. There were messages on the answering machine. The eagle has landed.
No.
I'm going, what are you guys talking about? Anyway, so that was my Christmas present. And off we went. And we collected everything that Huck put on paper. And God, I mean, just watching him grow and do the thing and keep amazing us over and over again has been remarkable.
You collected even what does he call the ones that he makes in between the big projects to make a little money, like the littles?
The little bugs, yeah, like a lot of artists, you're in need of cash all the time. So we would get phone calls. Hey, guess what I found? It's something you don't have. Yeah. Yeah. So we had everything.
Plus some blocks, which is amazing.
Yes. When the blocks became available, we jumped on it. We didn't buy all the blocks. We didn't buy any 2 weeks in August blocks. We bought blocks from the Bloody Bucket, The Revenge of the Marcies. I think you may have seen those. Couldn't get enough of them.
But
Yeah.
so, did you guys have a storage problem when the big 4x8 blocks come in?
See behind me those big flat files? Thank God for those guys. That's the beauty of works on paper. Paper's pretty thin. You can stack those puppies up and hide them, and it's pretty great. Yeah.
Where'd you stash the blocks?
I have great closets here in this studio, and my closets were filling up. A lot of our collection was framed, came to us framed. So when another space became available here at the City Museum on the fourth floor, we expanded, and it was a great COVID project for me. We're in the middle of COVID. The museum is closed, there's nobody around. And I spent, God, 2 months cleaning off the walls. The previous occupant smoked, and so we washed everything down, painted it all, and the overflow moved down the hall. So this is spring of 2020. And by the end of 2020, the museum acquired our collection. So, so that thing became virtually empty. And yeah, I said, great, I can put all my overflow from Wildwood down there. And that lasted about 2 months. And I just said, yeah, I don't need a gallery. Let's go. So we vacated that.
Did you imagine when you bought the Kiki Smith finger bowl that it would become as big a collection and that it would eventually find its way into a major museum?
Goodness, no. No,
Yeah.
no. Around 15 years in, Ted, who is very pragmatic, he's the one who jettisoned the period collection. And I went, oh my God, there goes my high boy. I'll promise I'll get you a new one. So, anyway, Ted, about 15 years into collecting, what's the end game here? What do we do with this? I don't know. Our kids don't want it. I guess you auction it or you sell it or you give it back to the dealers for inventory. I don't know, Ted. And we'd lie in bed and we'd look at the huge jars and go, what are we going to do with this stuff? But in 2018, the Art Museum had a show called Graphic Revolution. It was the first major print show they had in decades.
Wow.
And they went out into the community and borrowed from people's collections. When they got to our place, we don't have the same stuff that most people have. It's a little quirky, it's a little edgier, a little more political, yada yada. So they borrowed a lot of our things for that show, to the point when we walked in the show, it was embarrassing because there was a lot of our stuff. And so show comes down, everything comes back to us. 2019, Brent Benjamin asked us to lunch and started talking about what would happen to our collection and that they would be interested in the collection. And I asked him, I said, are you talking about after we were dead? Because, I think you should just send a truck over and get it now. So we can keep going. Yeah, it didn't take long. 18 months later, we had made the deal and I had done a inventory. Oh my God. If
Yeah.
you collect, do an inventory as you collect. That's hard, but at least you're not sitting there with, my count was 620 some pieces, but those were also portfolios counting as one. So in the end, I think it was over 800 pieces of stuff.
Oh, gosh.
So inventory, appraisal, make the deal. And I thought, oh, I'm done. And then it came time to move the stuff. So that was my introduction to the registrars.
Who are their own special breed.
Magic people.
Yes.
I think in another life I was a registrar. This was the most exciting thing, just one by one. Everything had to be photographed and given a number. And it was the most exciting time. And we had 2 weeks to do it because it had to be at the museum on December 28th of 2020. It was remarkable. So these guys who were packing as the registrars were inventorying this stuff and assigning numbers. And the things that were packed that day had to go in the truck into the museum. And it was like an episode of some sort of FBI thing where the boxes that were packed that day were sealed, put on the freight elevator with one of the registrars, taken down to the truck. Truck is locked, sitting in the dock. Registrar gets in the car, follows it to the museum, unloads it at the museum, counting as she goes. Oh my God, it was so cool to see that process. So yeah, it was great. It was really
There, this is completely off to the side, but when I worked at the National Gallery back in the 90s, they brought in a portion of the Vogel collection. I don't know if you remember the Vogels,
yeah.
but they were collectors of mostly small things. And it was mostly from artist friends that they, but they had a lot of things. And the registrars went up to their apartment in New York, and there were things in the oven and under the bed and in the litter box. And one of the registrars, I think, literally had a nervous breakdown. It was
Oh
just
my God.
such
Oh my God.
chaos.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video of Richard Tuttle bringing a wire piece to the vault. Yeah,
Right.
what a wonderful story.
I
Yeah,
know. Yeah. He was a mailman and she was a teacher, I think.
yeah, in a
Yeah.
little tiny apartment.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah,
why things were in the oven.
yes, yeah. Oh my God, can you imagine?
No. No, it was at the time I cataloged most of the collection when it came in, and I was like, "This was where?" And you go,
Yeah.
"Does it
Oh,
still
yeah.
smell?"
Is that a meatloaf I smell? Yeah,
Yeah,
under the bed. Yeah, anywhere. Yeah.
yeah. It's the registrars always have great stories.
Yes. Magic people.
I
Just
know, I know. So for you, the work that Wildwood Press publishes, and you don't print anymore personally, do you?
do I print the stuff?
Yeah. Are you hiring people to print for you?
No. Listen, when the recession hit, I'm in a 2,500 square foot studio with a litho press and a big 5 by 10 foot bed etching press. And that was fabulous. And it had a bedroom for the artist to sleep in, and it was really great. And then the recession hit, and my business fell off a cliff, and I thought I was done. So I gave my presses to my assistant, who had opened up her own press. Thank God I did that, because 3 months later I was printing again. So I now call the demise of Wildwood Press the reorganization of Wildwood Press. So I print offsite,
Oh, okay.
which has reduced my overhead greatly and reduced the temptation to print stuff that I really don't need to be printing. Someone would come, can you print this? Can you do? I don't want to do that anymore. No, 2 or 3 times a year, I get my apron on and latex gloves, and off we go. So I do print. I'm
Okay.
finishing up a project for Michael Eastman right now. Valerie Hammond and I are going to embark on something new. And Juan Sanchez is always lurking in the background, because we love each other and love to print together. So we're thinking about the newest next thing that will take another 3 years to print.
Where does he reside and where's he
He's in
based?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn? Okay.
In Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was born in Brooklyn and teaches at Hunter. Fabulous painter, finally getting some attention.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan for an archive of Wildwood Press's output to go somewhere? Is that a plan?
Plan is the wrong word. Every artist, every press, and every collector, as Ted would say, what's the end game? And yeah, there are some talks about stuff, but yeah,
Okay.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think the end game, I think we all need to think more about that. I think that's good advice from Ted.
Yeah, my poor children. You know, my mother was the hardest working artist I know.
Oh, I
And
didn't know she was an artist.
oh, sure, in her own lovely way. She could paint from the minute I have memory. She was doing ceramics or mosaics or copper enameling. And the last 60 years of her life, she was decorating eggs. And when I tell people that, they go, "Oh, yeah, right." No, we are using dental tools to make lattice work, and we open doors and you pull chains and things pop out of ostrich eggs and stuff. It was remarkable. And at the end of her life, I thought we had organized this pretty well, but there were 1,000 decorated eggs in her world that had to be shipped places, and children, whether they liked it or not, got boxes of eggs for Christmas trees. And yeah, she was amazing. She was
Wow.
amazing. But the lesson was that when I go, it is my great hope that my kids don't have to deal with 1,000 eggs. But guess what?
Hear ye, hear ye.
Yeah. See those big flat files back there? Yeah. In front of me are like a million books. Yeah.
How big are those flat files of yours?
The first time I saw flat files like this was at the Brooklyn Museum. I went to visit Marilyn Kushner, and she had these beautiful flat files. I said, "Where'd you get them?" And she goes, "They're from your neighborhood." And I said, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, Kansas, your neighborhood." So there's a company called Delta Cabinets, and they make these flat files, and a lot of them are for scientific labs, where you have dead birds at Cornell in flat files like this, and they custom make them. So the largest print I had printed to date was 9 feet by 4 feet for Yitzhak Eliashev. So I ordered them to be 5 feet deep and 10 feet wide. I bought my first set at the old studio, and it became very clear that when I moved into this space 10 years ago, I needed another set. They're whoppers.
They are whoppers. Yeah, the BMA had a pretty big, but only one unit. So it was all of the Toulouse-Lautrec posters were in there and stuff. The National Gallery had more of them. And I think they were 96 wide, if I recall correctly. And I always
Yeah.
thought that was the biggest possible.
No, I mean, the guy who builds the presses here in St. Louis, those big presses, moves the flat files for me so they can be taken apart. The drawers come out, and
Who's the press person in St. Louis?
Warren Sauer. Peter Marcus was hired to form the first printmaking department at School of Art at WashU. Prior to that, printmaking had been taught at the architecture school, which was interesting, and small, standard issue kind of prints. And apparently, there was a lovely Japanese guy who had very traditional Japanese woodcut guy. And in 68, Peter was hired, brought to St. Louis. And in 1968, painters were painting things too big to get out of their studio. And Rosenquist was doing that airplane thing. And Peter said, "I want to make prints at the scale of those paintings," and built the first 4 foot wide etching press. They had all these rollers, and Warren Sauer was a cousin of Jane Sauer, a wonderful basket maker who was a friend of Peter's. And Warren has a big factory. And so he's a machinist. And so he helped Peter build that first press.
Oh, wow.
That was 68. By 92, Peter has a newer, better, bigger idea of what a press should be. And I was the guinea pig because I had just graduated, and I said, "I want a press. Forget that litho crap. We're gonna make big old prints." Yeah, we did a 5 foot wide. The beds are 10 feet long, and Warren built them, and they're absolutely magnificent. And in that first generation of presses, you would set the pressure on either side of the press. So you spent most of your time like winding this thing over here and running over here. And they were electric, so you could push a button. That was fabulous. But still, you had to do the pressure. The new generation of those presses, one side
Oh,
set the pressure. And
nice.
it's fantastic.
That's a game changer.
It really is. And obviously, Takish started building big presses, and there are other people who do that. But yeah, I think there are 5 of those presses in St. Louis now.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah.
All right. So the last thing we just need to touch on briefly, and then I'll let you get on with your day, is that Wildwood Press and the fabulous Maryanne Ellison Simmons is coming to Baltimore in the end of March for the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair. I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
The vehicle that we're driving, suddenly I'm thinking, perhaps I should rent something bigger. It's just the Baltimore Print Fair, in which I said, I'm going to bring these prints, I'm going to put them on the wall, and you talk me into a table of prints. Okay, I can do that. Suddenly, like a Wildwood Press project has exploded. So no telling what we're bringing. So,
We might need to give you a larger booth.
no, please, God, don't say that. No, no,
I'm excited to have you here because it's
it'll be
you
great.
yeah, you make some great stuff. So it'll be awesome to have you here. Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be there.
All right. Well, thank you for chatting with me. I love talking with people about the print world because it's just there's so many facets to it and everybody has a different story, It's great.
Thank you again.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
All right, see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Platemark. I hope you enjoyed Maryanne. She's a lovely person. Thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. As always, I truly appreciate it. Please go over to platemarkpodcast.com and click the support and donate button and help us keep the lights on here at Platemark. Really appreciate it. And also click that microphone button and leave me a voicemail. Ask me a question, I dare you. I think that's it. We will see you next time.